year-ending tragedy. Grieving families await their loved ones lost in the AirAsia crash. The flu spares few. You've either had it, have it, or could get it. First, Vespers. Pope Francis presides over a prayerful transition into a new year. And looking back, some of the biggest moments for the Church and the Holy Father of 2014. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for New Year's Eve, Wednesday, December 31st, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. We begin tonight with the latest on recovery efforts at the crash site of AirAsia Flight 8501. 2 of the 10 bodies recovered so far have been returned to Surabaya, the city where the fateful journey began. Severe weather continues to hinder search and recovery operations in the Java Sea off Indonesia. Shadows in the water and sonar may lead to the plane's fuselage. A pastor from Surabaya says 41 passengers were members of his church. They apparently were traveling together to celebrate the holidays in Singapore. The recovery effort is now focused on identifying the victims.
We don't have any target how fast the expedition, but we are doing the best. Yeah, the successful of identification not depends on the pastor, but depends on the accuracy of the process of identification.
It's been a tragic year for air travel in that part of the world. A few thousand miles to the south of the AirAsia search area, a smaller search area continues for the missing Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. That plane disappeared in the Indian Ocean without a trace March 8th. 239 passengers and crew were aboard. On July 14th, Malaysia Air suffered another tragedy when Flight 17 was shot down near the Ukraine-Russia border. A Dutch investigation team was given limited access to the crash site. It is still unclear who fired the missile that blew the plane out of the sky, but all evidence points to the pro-Russian rebels. There were 298 people on that plane. And AirAsia Flight 5017 was lost over West Africa in July. That plane disappeared after pilots reported a change in course to avoid bad weather conditions. The wreckage was found about 2 days later in the desert in Mali. 116 lives were lost in that crash. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Flu outbreaks are popping up in every region of the country, prompting health authorities to now call it an epidemic. Wyatt Goolsby is here with the latest tonight.
Brian, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, influenza is now widespread in 36 states. 15 children have died so far this flu season, which has doctors urging their patients to take steps to avoid getting sick. The month of December has been a busy one for hospitals across the country. Pneumonia and influenza are to blame for nearly 7% of deaths last week, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The agency also says so far the number of flu patients is up from this time last year. Minnesota is one example of a state dealing with an outbreak. An early arrival of an especially dangerous strain of the flu has parents concerned about sending their kids to school.
Right now, my 15-year-old is home with a fever, and we just sort of keep him in his room. So in light of what we're seeing with deaths, especially in young teenagers, it would make me probably want to respond very quickly within the first 24 hours.
In addition to Minnesota, other states also reporting widespread cases of the flu include Pennsylvania, Iowa, and Tennessee. Health authorities have warned this year's flu strain has mutated in ways that make the vaccine less effective than experts initially hoped. Nevertheless, doctors here in Washington tell EWTN News Nightly if you haven't got a flu shot yet, it's still a good idea to get one.
It does provide you some additional protection in that most flu is either an A or a B type of influenza. So if you have some antibodies to that, it's going to provide you with some protection against contracting the flu, as well as it's going to make your symptoms less severe.
McGrath also says to better your chances of not getting sick, get an annual flu shot, wash your hands often, and not touch your eyes, hands, and nose after interacting with people who could be sick. Flu activity generally peaks in the United States between December and February and can persist as late as May. As we say, the cases of flu are high right now, but health officials say it's too soon to tell whether this season will be overall worse than last year. Brian.
I missed Christmas Day because of the flu, Wyatt. Thank you. You stay healthy. Well, a British nurse is being treated for the Ebola virus. Pauline Cafferkey is in isolation at a London facility. She was diagnosed with the virus in Scotland following a trip to Africa. Doctors are giving her blood from Ebola survivors to aid her recovery, along with a series of other treatments.
It's an experimental antiviral drug. She's very well aware that this is experimental treatment. It's not proven to work. You're probably all aware that there is no specific treatment for Ebola that has been proven to work.
Cafferkey is the first patient diagnosed with the disease on British soil. Some health officials are calling for stronger screening procedures at airports in the UK. 20,000 people have been infected with Ebola in the past 12 months. 7,800 have died, most of them in West Africa. A federal judge denies a request by the suspected Boston Marathon bomber to relocate his trial. The trial is scheduled to start on Monday. Defense lawyers for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev says it's impossible to find an impartial jury in the Boston area given the massive media attention. The defense team also wanted more time to prepare. Tsarnaev says, or has pleaded not guilty to 30 federal charges connected with the April 2013 explosions near the marathon finish line. 3 people died and more than 260 were injured. The world is already ringing in the new year with celebrations traveling from east to west. Spectacular in Sydney, Australia. One of the first and largest New Year's celebrations happened earlier today. There were fireworks, music, and fanfare over that city's beautiful harbor. The party cost more than $7 million and is seen around the world by about 1 billion people. Another spectacular light show and celebration in Beijing's Olympic Park. A massive crowd welcomed 2015 at the site of the 2008 Summer Olympic Games. Beijing could put in a bid for the 2022 Games. It borrowed some of its New Year's celebration know-how from the historic 2008 opening ceremonies. And here in the U.S., security is tight for one of the biggest New Year's parties in the country, if not the world. More than 1 million people are expected to be in Times Square tonight to welcome 2015. The iconic 12-foot, 12,000-pound ball has been polished and tested. At midnight, it will sparkle with LED lights that randomly change colors with more than 16 million different lighting combinations. Will Pope Francis give thanks for the a year that just ended at the Vatican's annual New Year's Eve Vespers service. The liturgy for the octave of Christmas and the Solemnity of Mary included the singing of the Te Deum and exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. In his homily, Pope Francis spoke about the meaning of time, saying God entered into our history to reveal himself. 2014 saw a series of memorable moments at the Vatican as Francis leads the Church for his first full year as Pope. Pope Francis elevated 19 new cardinals in February, many from the world's poorest countries. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI attended, marking the first time he appeared publicly with Pope Francis. In March, President Obama met with the Pope at the Vatican. The President received a copy of The Joy of the Gospel as a gift and invited the Pope to visit America. Later in the year, Francis confirmed a U.S. visit next summer. 2 beloved popes, John Paul II and John the 23rd, were canonized in April. More than 1 million pilgrims witnessed the historic event. On Pentecost Sunday, Francis brought together Israeli and Palestinian leaders for an invocation for peace in the Vatican Gardens. The long-anticipated Extraordinary Synod on the Family opened in October, sparking frank discussions and attracting world media attention. Francis ended the Synod celebrating the Beatification Mass for Pope Paul VI, who presided over most of the Second Vatican Council. As Advent began, Francis declared this a year for consecrated life, urging the Church's consecrated members to be a joyful witness. And finally, the Pope's advisors on church reform met 5 times in 2014 as they continue to tackle issues from the Vatican's finances to its governance. A little later, Alan Holdren will cover some of the Pope's travels. over 2014. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council rejects a Palestinian resolution to end Israel's occupation. The U.S., of course an ally of Israel, voted no earlier this week. The American ambassador to the UN says the U.S. wants a peace deal to come from negotiations between the two factions. Well, partially in response to the vote on the UN, the Palestinian president announced today that he would try to get his country to join the International Criminal Court. Mahmoud Abbas hopes the move would allow the Palestinian Authority to charge Israel with war crimes following decades of ongoing conflict. Pope Francis acted earlier this year to help promote peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Our Alan Holdren was in the Vatican Gardens for the Transcendent Prayer Meeting in June.
From his home inside the Vatican, Pope Francis is promoting peace in the Holy Land. Sunday was a day of grand gestures and prayer. Two nations in conflict, Israel and Palestine. Pope Francis brought their presidents together to ask God for peace.
Spero che questo incontro
It is my hope that this meeting will mark the beginning of a new journey where we seek the things that unite so as to overcome the things that divide. It is a meeting which responds to the fervent desire of all who long for peace and dream of a world in which men and women can live as brothers and sisters and no longer as adversaries and enemies.
non da avversari o da nemici. Per fare la pace.
Peacemaking calls for courage, much more so than warfare.
Molto di più che per fare la guerra.
And those words reciprocated by the Israeli President Peres.
From Jerusalem I've come to call for shalom, salam, for peace. Peace between nations, peace between faith, peace between people. Let's all of us join hands and make it happy.
In his native Arabic, President Abbas said that Palestinians want peace for themselves and for their neighbors.
نريد السلام لنا ولجيراننا.
They called this encounter a pause from politics, and there's no telling what effect their plea for peace might have. For now, what remains is an olive tree in the Vatican Gardens and the prayers they've sent to heaven.
Coming up, we were with Pope Francis on his Holy Land pilgrimage this year. We'll reconnect with those powerful moments when we come back.
From the Vatican Embassy, on behalf of the Holy Father, I extend to you and the EWTN News Nightly family our warm best wishes for a blessed and peace-filled Christmas.
Thank you for joining us on this New Year's Eve. I'm Brian Patrick. The Central Philippines dealing with the aftermath of a destructive tropical storm. At least 53 people died in landslides and flash floods. Nearly 30 were buried alive. More than 130,000 have been evacuated to emergency shelters. Forecasters are expecting the storm to weaken and dissipate shortly, but an awful lot of cleanup. The Holy Father is calling the murder of a Mexican priest unjustifiable. Pope Francis sent a telegram to the home diocese of Father Gregorio Lopez expressing his deep sadness. The priest was murdered last week after preaching a sermon against organized crime. He is the third priest to be killed in that region this year. Well, this January, we can all join the Holy Father in praying for and working toward more interfaith cooperation. The Pope's universal prayer intention for the month is that those from diverse religious traditions may work together for peace. It was a very busy year for Pope Francis. The Holy Father canonized 11 saints. He made papal visits to 7 countries. He even helped broker a groundbreaking deal between the U.S. and Cuba. And Francis brought together hundreds of world and religious leaders in acts of solidarity. But perhaps the highlight of the Pope's year was a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. EWTN News Nightly was there with him. Our Alan Holdren looks back.
2 walls, 1 story, and a Pope with a radical message. Peace. After a whirlwind tour of Jordan, Palestine, and Israel, the question remains, is lasting peace possible? At the wall that separates Israel and Palestine, this gesture against terrorism drew criticism and praise. And at the only wall that remains of the ancient temple, called the Wailing Wall, another powerful act, another flashpoint.
I would imagine and even analyze that the majority are delighted. I think that they're delighted that a man has come and spoken the truth and is now trying to find ways to bring people together to serve as a bridge. But of course not everybody is delighted, and the effects of this visit are going to depend on how closely have we listened, how closely have we interiorized a discourse which is certainly not political.
It's the Holy Land, but it's a land of contradiction. It's a land of conflict. What stuck with people was a powerful gesture, a hug between a Catholic, a Jew, and a Muslim. And that has sparked some hope.
His reactions were really the reaction of the spiritual and the human leader. And that is very important for me as the mayor of Bethlehem. We're not alone.
Up next, a saint with a sense of humor. We revisit Wyatt Goolsby's story on Pope John the 23rd, who was canonized this year. As the octave of Christmas continues on this New Year's Eve, thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, along with Alan Holdren, who's been following the Holy Father's busy year. He'll be back with us shortly. With demand for tobacco products shrinking, business is not so great for tobacco auctioneers. Our Catherine Elliott reports how their song-like chants remind farmers of that industry's glory days.
25,
like the Pied Piper, a hymnal chant of the tobacco auctioneer guides would-be buyers throughout the warehouse.
The auction itself is about keeping everybody's interest and keeping a rhythm up. We get in a rhythm on a good sale, and it's just like singing a song.
These are the sounds of Central Kentucky's tobacco business. A procession of buyers touching and handling bales of the crop as Foy, an auctioneer veteran of 4 decades, calls out the prices.
You see them out there with all their fingers out, that means that $1.25 or $1.35 or $1.15, you know, whatever the auctioneer is saying.
Foy leading the delicate dance at the start of this season's sales.
When you got 6, 8, 10 people participating, and everybody is a professional at the top of their game, you can walk down the row and you can almost dance to the tune of the sale.
But this tradition is quickly fading away as most of the state's burley tobacco is sold under contracts between farmers and big companies, cutting out the warehouse operators completely. And an excess of crop combined with lower demand is driving burley prices down, leaving auctioneers like Foy struggling.
40 years ago, tobacco was the mainstay of all your small farmers to get actual cash money in their pocket. And it was a way of life. And it's sad that it's gone away, but times change.
Despite setbacks, devoted auctioneers like Foy have hung on. Supporters say they provide an alternative for farmers unable or unwilling to sign contracts for less than desirable prices.
It makes me thank God every day that I've been tough enough to hold out.
Holding out for another day as the familiar song winds down. Catherine Elliott, EWTN News Nightly.
Unfortunate for the auctioneers, but certainly better for America that tobacco is on the slide. Well, this year, EWTN News Nightly covered landmark Supreme Court cases affecting Catholics and other Americans. In a 5-4 decision in May, the High Court ruled that prayers are allowed at government meetings and can be chosen according to the belief of the one offering the prayers. It was a victory for the town of Greece, New York, and for the free exercise of religion in public settings. In June, the court ruled unanimously to eliminate buffer zones around abortion clinics. The ruling by Chief Justice John Roberts said the state of Massachusetts cannot stop pro-life counselors from engaging in free speech. And a few days later, a victory for religious freedom advocates. The court ruled in favor of family-owned businesses, Conestoga Wood and Hobby Lobby, in their fight against the Health and Human Services Department's contraception mandate. Justices said some for-profit companies should not be required to provide health services that violate the consciences of their owners. And in 2015, the High Court hears another challenge to Obamacare. Justices could also take up a case on abortion restrictions. And with federal appeals courts now split on legalizing marriage between gay couples, the Supreme Court could add that to its calendar. We'll follow all these cases closely for you. Well, it took a lot of stamina to keep up with Pope Francis during 2014. EWTN News Nightly's Alan Holdren did his best, even scoring a seat on the papal plane accompanying the Holy Father to Korea in August.
He's become a phenomenon in the West, attracting so many, even non-believers. But now it's clear the Pope's appeal and message is resonating in this part of Asia. It's been an outpouring of affection from the get-go in this land, where the Church is thriving despite a history of persecution. It couldn't have come at a better time. The nation is locked in a bitter standoff with their neighbor to the north, and grieving after a ferry disaster in April that claimed more than 300 lives.
May this tragic event, which has brought all Koreans together in grief, confirm their commitment to work together in solidarity for the common good.
This visit has brought hope and consolation. This weekend, hundreds of thousands turned out to see the Pope beatify 124 martyrs, pillars of the Church which was founded by lay converts in the 18th century. His uncanny ability to connect with people has been constantly on display during the 5-day visit.
Christ is knocking at the door of your heart.
Whether he's with young people who gathered here from all over Asia, or at a home for people with disabilities, or consoling families of the victims of the ferry sinking, which has set off a firestorm of criticism of the government and demands for an investigation. While his gestures stirred great emotion, the message was pointed, an appeal for peace with North Korea, a call to reject materialism, the result of rapid economic growth here, and a reminder to serve the poor. That has struck a chord here, especially with the young.
I want to share the faith with especially the Korean and the Asian youth.
I was so happy we can stay at the same place at the same time. Yeah, it was really blessed.
The Pope tried to say the word peace, and then he's really caring about the old and the children. So we hope unification, united together. So that's what I really looking forward.
That desire for peace, a theme of the trip, even extended to China, which has a tense relationship with the Vatican. But Francis expressed a hope for dialogue at the end of his trip. No doubt he hopes the fruits of this visit will be seen there and throughout Asia.
Alan Holdren, thank you for all your contributions tonight and throughout the year. And as the new year begins, Francis picks up his travels right where he left off. In just a couple of weeks, he's off to Sri Lanka and the Philippines. Our EWTN News Nightly team will be there. Alan again traveling on the papal plane. And of course, the Pope comes to the U.S. next fall for the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. Many of us are hoping to see him then. EWTN News Nightly was blessed to be in Rome in April for the canonizations of John Paul the Great and John the 23rd. Wyatt Goolsby gave us a look at the human and somewhat humorous side of the good Pope, who called Vatican II.
John the 23rd's papacy lasted less than 5 years, but his brief time in office is full of stories.
When they asked him, well, how many people work in the Vatican? He said about half.
Father Richard D'Amelio, a professor at the Catholic University of America, describes Pope John as a man who related directly with people.
People liked him, I think. There was something about him that they liked. You know, if you like a person, you listen to them. And I think that's what it was. And then when you listen to him, he had something to say. His eyes twinkled. He had a good approach to life. He was joyful.
Not long after he was elected, John was walking the streets of Rome when he heard a woman call him fat. The Pope reportedly turned and said, "Madam, I trust you understand that the papal conclave is not exactly a beauty contest." Pope John also contemplated big issues, saying it often happens that I wake up at night and begin to think about a serious problem, and I decide I must tell the Pope about it. Then I wake up completely and remember that I am the Pope.
It's important for someone in my position to know when to keep quiet and when to talk. To speak the right amount, to speak with elegance, to speak with respect for all people.
Many say it was his humility that people were drawn to, saying anyone can be Pope, look at me. But perhaps he's best known for calling the Second Vatican Council. When Vatican officials told him it would be absolutely impossible to open the council by 1963, he said, fine, we'll open it in 1962. Sure enough, his honest approach and tongue-in-cheek responses are a few reasons he's still called Good Pope John. Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
On that note, we'll see you tomorrow for the Solemnity of Mary. Happy New Year.